Hello, Peter 47890 here, Cyrus, and I have with me my good friend ForestReviews here today to discuss a game that people seemingly having a different opinion on now that they're playing it for the second time. What that game is Final Fantasy XII Zodiac Age. So how are you doing this fine evening, Forrest?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me on this review with you.
Anyway, from people I've talked to and seeing the Twitter posts, it seems people are really liking Final Fantasy XII more now compared to back in the day. So, what are your thoughts on that, Forrest?
Well, I'm actually in that majority. I originally played Final Fantasy XII when it came out for PS2. Matter of fact, I picked it up day one. I got the collector's edition. And I was excited to play it because I actually, liked Final Fantasy X. 10-2 was interesting mix of slightly liking it and slightly disliking it. And I was hoping that this game would be a good transition because we knew the PS3 was coming out not that far off, So I was hoping that this game was going to be the last hurrah for the PS2. And I remember going into the game and just being very disappointed in the original Final Fantasy XII. And mostly because of just really strange licensing system that the game uses. I didn't quite understand it, but I didn't hate the original one, but I definitely didn't like the original 12. And I never finished the original Final Fantasy 12 because of it. Played it for about 23 to 27 hours before I just stopped playing it. I just couldn't advance any further due to the structure of the game mechanics.
Okay. Personally, I'm pretty surprised that the reception is so much more positive. I mean, wasn't surprised that the game was going to come out just because it's Square Enix and they really released Final Fantasy X remaster or remake out already twice on the PS3 and PS4. But yeah, I'm pretty surprised that people are liking it more. I don't know if it's because people are older now and can appreciate what it does, or it's because, and it's going to be said more negative, that because of Final Fantasy 13 and possibly 15 creating such a whiplash that they're enjoying Final Fantasy 12 just because it might be better than Final Fantasy 13, 15. Anyway, as for my first time playing through Final Fantasy 12, I'd probably say it's like my second mainline Final Fantasy title I played, the first being Final Fantasy X. Though Final Fantasy X wasn't my first Final Fantasy. It's just the first mainline. My actual first Final Fantasy was Final Fantasy Tactics. And I beat it. I beat it through and got to level 99 with most of the characters. And I liked it. It has some flaws, some positives. It wasn't great, but it wasn't god-awful.
You bring up a good point about something that I didn't think about before. We're talking about two different generations ago, and when you consider at that moment in time, you had 10-10 and Final Fantasy 9 being that kind of that more recent last generation PS1 game versus the previous two PS2 ports or iterations. Definitely a different type of gaming generation, in terms of the games at that time. You had to compare the games of then to the games of now, and I think with Final Fantasy, it's considered for most downward spiral when 13 came out, and then 13-2 and Lightning Returns. That may be the gray or the black sheep, I should say, of Final Fantasy for most people. I personally like Final Fantasy 13, but I think really what we should look at is the 10 and 10-2 HD remaster, Final Fantasy 14 and Final Fantasy 15. Now, 14 is considered great by MMO standards. A lot of people like it. I know yourself included. You're a big fan of Final Fantasy 14. But then you also have to consider change of how Final Fantasy is adapted, whether it's better or worse. And there was a lot of hype for 15, and I think when you consider 15, a lot of people were disappointed with 15. I mean, I don't think it was a bad game, but the hype was definitely underwhelming when the game came out. I think 12 really kind of showed what Square Enix was capable of presenting in terms of style and substance that many miss out on Final Fantasy. A lot of people either miss it or just have nostalgia towards that style of gameplay that is really not recognizable anymore. And it really feels as though Final Fantasy has gone mainstream to a point that it's catering towards a different audience altogether, and they're really missing the whole idea of what really made Final Fantasy special in the first place.
Okay, let's now actually talk about the game, that the impact that it's leaving on people. So let's talk about the visuals. Visually, I think it's a pretty good visual upgrade. Mostly I just noticed that it's just a resolution upgrade. The actual models hasn't been worked on, like in Final Fantasy X Remake, where you can tell that the models were worked on, aka Tidus's face. But in terms of Final Fantasy 12, it just updated the resolution from what I remembered. That, and I'm not sure if it's because of the resolution update, but it seems that most of the cutscenes have this
You're talking about like the motion blur?
yeah, the motion blur.
Yeah, the motion blur I think was a kind of a common thing on PS2 games. Even Final Fantasy X I think suffered from motion blur.
I just find it much more noticeable in Final Fantasy 12 for some reason.
I think it might be more noticeable. That's true. Me personally, when it comes down to the visuals of the game, I definitely can see a drastic improvement in what they were able to transpire from the original. For instance, when you're walking around Remaster, you can actually see the improved anti-aliasing of this game in terms of the buildings and the concrete and the environment outside of those main town hubs. You can definitely see the improvement in the visuals from the aesthetic point of view. Now, I have a PS4 Pro, and there is literally no huge difference between the original PS4 and Pro. Even though the game clearly says it's PS4 Pro compatible, unfortunately, I don't really see what really makes it, Pro enhanced. There's nothing that I can tell that really does make it Pro enhanced. So unfortunately, for those who think there may be some differences and maybe consider picking it up, you have a Pro, there really is not much difference. But I really do think the visuals are hugely improved.
For me, I just think that the visual improvement from like Final Fantasy X to the remaster is more noticeable to me than it is from Final Fantasy 12 to this remaster.
No, you're absolutely right. Now, if we did a comparison to that, yeah, I agree. There really is not that much noticeable improvement. I think what you're referring to are the facial recognitions that 10 was noticed for, and they definitely did fix Tidus's face a lot compared to 12. But to be honest, the character model doesn't really look that bad on a PS2 anyway.
Final Fantasy 12 overall is still a pretty good looking PS2 game, even to this day. And I really do like the artistic design they put in this game, especially Remaster with its more Arab aesthetic and desert aesthetic.
I agree.
And I think it's a really unique looking game when I first played through it, and it's still a very unique looking game. In terms of sound design, I think it's pretty dang good. Final Fantasy 12 original soundtrack was really pretty good, but I think the updated version is still pretty dang good as well.
What is interesting about Final Fantasy 12 Zodiac Age is the game actually has improved remastered music soundtracks that were composed for the original. And what they do to have nostalgia factor is that they allow you to change between both the original soundtrack and the remastered soundtrack, which is actually really interesting. Because some of the songs are debatable whether they're better than the original or vice versa. But what's also more interesting is that some of the songs used in certain dungeons and certain field environments are actually created just for this game. So not only are there remastered songs, there are original songs added to this game as well that may have been repetitive songs reused from different other environments or dungeons. So that really does add to the immersion of not only it being a remaster, but being the international version of the game. So I do definitely like that a lot.
The orchestral score really does add impact to the scenes in this game. And you just really feel the emotion of the scenes being played out. Let's talk about the story, shall we? So, Forrest, what's your take on the story now that you actually beat the game for the first time? I'm curious on what your thoughts on it are, since you never beat the game.
Well, let's just say from a political standpoint, I think the story is very intricate. It is very deep, and it's almost in a way very methodical in the way it's portrayed. It's told in a way that's done historically. So you have a guy that's speaking about the history of the events of Final Fantasy XII, but you follow a character named Vaughn, who, for most people, don't really consider him to be the main character. You start out playing as him because this is actually the very beginning of the game. His youngest brother, or rather his oldest brother, I should say, is actually killed prior. His brother is actually played or used as in a tutorial sense, but he's with this girl named Penelo, and they're friends in remaster. Now, what's interesting about this is that you come across the other characters who are part of the political spectrum, and you start to realize that Vaughn and Penelo pretty much take the back seat at a certain point. That's one of the things I noticed a lot of people had a gripe about with this game, is that it doesn't make a lot of sense to use these characters when they don't really have a purpose in the story whatsoever. You start to understand this more so when you realize that the princess is now in the midst of a huge war that could spawn at any time, and she's in the conflict of interest of how to actually deal with all the different other imperial armies in their capitals and the other countries trying to stop a war from breaking out. And I think when I was playing this game, I started to realize that I think the story is misunderstood with Vaughn and Penelo, especially when you introduce the other characters as well, like Fran, for instance. So here's my issue with 12 in terms of this, and why people I think are misconstrued. So there's a part in the story that I'm going to leave not too much told about spoilers for the sake of this review. There's a part where Ash and I think it's Asha. I could be pronouncing her name wrong. I always get
Ash.
this. Ash. Yeah, I used to say Asha, but it's Ash. So Ash and Vaughn actually talk amongst each other about her fiance being killed and not returning back to the kingdom. And he reflects on revenge for his brother's death. Now these two have something very in common that actually really hit me in one place that most people don't really take a lot of credit for. It's them understanding each other. They're from different sides of the spectrum, but I think Vaughn was completely misunderstood for his purpose in the story. He had a purpose in the story. It's for revenge. And it may not seem like something that stands out, and it seems like it just takes the back seat of it, but it really does make a lot of sense for him to be there.
And revenge is really a key point in the story, I think. The political intrigue I also find pretty interesting, but the theme of vengeance really ties this story together, from Ash's revenge. And this is basically a story about how far she can go with her vengeance, whether she can go along with it to the extreme or not, with the story really giving emphasis on how destructive just blind vengeance can be, and how destructive it can be to yourself, such as with what happened with Bosch's brother.
Yeah, I agree with that too, and not to mention the other two characters we forgot to talk about. They may not have so much of a vengeance, but they do have a purpose alongside them. More like pirates in a sense, but you kind of get the understanding that they're also just as important. They're not meaningless in any sense of the words. I think my overall thoughts of the story from my first time playing it, with all it said, I absolutely like the story. In fact, I'll leave a part out at the end when we finish the review that I want to mention. But yes, I definitely thought the story was very revengeful in a sense, but it was very structured well, told in a historical fashion, and I like that about the game.
For me personally, I say I like the story. I think the political intrigue in Final Fantasy XII Zodiac Age is much more clearer now, just because there's option to speed the game to twice the speed or 4 times the speed, and that really does help the political maneuvering be a bit more memorable, just because in the original Final Fantasy 12 there were long stretches of the game where it would take forever to go to the next cutscene, and you might forgot what happened in previous scenes. With the times 2 time force speed, you really do see why certain events happen this way.
Yeah, you bring up another good point with that. I didn't think about that either.
And as I said, the game has a strong themes of vengeance and how it can be damaging to an individual, which is why you have like the story of Ash and why Bosch's brother is so integral to the story. But I think another theme that I got through the game, playing it for the second time now, is the past, of how we can be chained by the past, which is why both Thier and Bosch himself tie into the story of how we need to be able to basically face our past and to not let it chain us. So I really like it in terms of the political maneuvering as well as the themes that the game tries to employ. But I do think that the characters do suffer in this game, because I won't say that Vaughn and Penelo doesn't have a purpose. With Penelo, it shows you of how the Empire isn't a totally one-note villainous empire with her involvement with Larsa later on, and Vaughn because he's also tied to the themes of vengeance that the game is going for, and how he moves on through it. But I will agree that once their purpose is served, they don't really have a point in the story there.
I guess what we should be saying is, are people misconstruing this after the fact that their purpose is served, or? Yeah,
because after that scene you said about Vaughn and Ash talking about their loved ones and their drive for vengeance, from that point on, you can just cut Vaughn out of the story and nothing would have changed. And that's pretty early on in the story too.
Well,
and same thing with Penelo.
Well, I got a different sense from that. There was a point later on in the story, towards the end, it's probably about 90% towards the end of the game. I would say 90% into the end of the game. There's this boss fight you encounter that actually happens, and I remember there was a part where Vaughn meets a certain person, which I will leave nameless because it is part of the plot twist of the story. You find this out later on, but when you actually see it evolve, then it makes sense. It makes sense to the beginning of the game. He has his moment where he loses it. He wants this revenge. He finally has his opportunity, but it doesn't actually happen. And so even when you mentioned how they had that talk, that one-on-one conversation, it still wasn't complete. I think there was still a reason that he was still there, and I think that when that happened, I think that's when it was fulfilled. And by that point, it was the end of the game. So at that point, he finally got to get to the point where he needed to be. And it made a full circle for not only him, but Penelo as well, because she was the string that at some point kept the war at bay for a moment. And I won't spoil the reason why for her specifically, but it does impact one of the kingdoms. And as he mentioned, Larsa, who had something to do with that. And you know, when you really think about it, every one of these characters are like a web to each other. They're the spider that creates the webs. That even though they're thin enough, you can actually see the webs and where they're connected to in some way of the structure and what makes sense to the story. And you may not notice it, and you have to really pay a close attention to the story. If you just don't, then you're really not going to understand the impact of the story as much. You're going to be like, what is going on? And then you're going to get to the end of the game, it's like, it was nothing special. But I think, Peter, you have to pay attention to it. If you just don't, if you just kind of blase through the game, it's and it won't have that purpose or that impact that you really are looking for.
That, and I do think that the actual character interaction is pretty low key in this game.
You mean in terms of them actually interacting with each other on a constant
them
basis?
actually talking to each other and having chemistry with each other. There's like, besides like a few points, like the Vaughn and Ash talk, I didn't really feel all that connected to the group, just because most of the story is on the political intrigue and the themes of vengeance.
You know, that is true. I don't recall them actually having, I guess in a way, learning each other, being around each other, and having a conversation, other than a few times. And I think when it comes down to characters in terms of getting to know them, that's something you don't really get to experience in Final Fantasy XII. That's least impactful. So you don't really get that connection as you would if you were playing Persona 5 or Persona 4
Tales
Golden
games.
or a Tales game. Yes. Like for instance, an example, when you play Tales of Exilia, you walk around in the world map, you actually have skits. They have these funny one-on-one humors or as a group. And it really kind of gives you this other side of the characters. That's just not the serious side. Final Fantasy XII gives you the serious side and not much substance of some humor. Penelo may be the only character where in the very beginning of the game she gave some level of humor, and it was dry humor, but it was there for her, and that's about it, quite honestly.
I'd probably say, in terms of story, the characters are just there to drive the plot along, with the plot being the most important part of the story in terms of the political intrigue as well as the themes that the story tries to tell.
Now let's spin it a little bit, and let's just say, for the sake of argument, so we're just trying to be as neutral on this as we can. What if, in a sense of the characters being in the situation they're in, that they're semi-fugitives, because they're not really fugitives, but due to the outcome of the situation, they're in a situation where I guess humor really isn't valid. It would be like watching Starsky and Hutch and going, okay, humor while this is happening. It wouldn't make much sense. I guess in a way they're really more very serious about trying to stop a war from occurring, trying to fix a situation with royalty, a bloodline that could be almost lost altogether, and revenge. So in a way, it's really not, I guess, warranted to have that meaningful conversation, humor that really kind of breaks up the monotony of the story a bit. So I guess it's
not even humor that I'm looking for. I'm just looking for some character interaction that doesn't have to pertain to the main plot. With how I'm just looking for conversations where they can just be themselves and actually talk to each other like normal people.
And I understand that. I just don't think it was warranted in a sense. I think because of the situation they were in, they were constantly on the move. They were traveling across countries. They were having to go into back doors to get in certain kingdoms. I don't know if that would have been a good way to have that kind of character interaction in a game like this. I mean, just looking at the way that the game was being played out, it just, I mean, I'm trying to figure it out if it would have worked. I don't know how it would have worked in a case like this.
But overall, the story, we liked it. I do think it has some flaws. Like, for me personally, the characters' interaction was pretty okay and not all that engaging to me. But overall, it's still a pretty decent story, I think.
Yeah, myself, I did like the story too. I think I might have liked it a little bit more just because I didn't really come across it in the end after I beat the game, not being disappointed with the story.
And let's talk about the gameplay now. Let's talk about that overworld, huh? Oh boy.
Overworld.
You know what? You know what was the biggest problem with the original Final Fantasy XII overworld?
What was that?
It took too long to get anywhere.
Yes. The overworld is by far the most open-ended Final Fantasy mainline Final Fantasy game that I've ever played. Final Fantasy X, which many people don't even realize this, was more linear. It almost was just as linear.
People do realize it.
Oh, they do. Okay. Well, it's just as linear as Final Fantasy 13, with Final Fantasy 13 being the most linear game ever. But yes, the open world in 12 was vast. You had desert areas, mountain areas, you had swamp terrain, you even had environments, like, such, for instance, doing certain missions, the environments would change. So you have a desert, like a what do they call it?
A dry season and a rain season. In the Giza plains, there's these like deep crevices that you see in the dry season, and you probably won't really make note of it. Well, when you're going through the game, but once you go back to the area during the rain season and you see the river, there's like rivers now where those crevices are. It's like that where the environment change, and it's pretty neat to see.
Not just that, but even in like the sand areas, you have your sandstorms where you can't even see in front of you at times. So I do like the fact that the game did have environments that affected the regions. There's even one area where there's lightning in an area where they have stronger enemies that only occur during different weather events.
Though I think that the quests pertaining to the weather events were pretty annoying.
Oh yeah, like the one with the desert. You have to fight that big T-Rex. Oh my goodness. And the build up to fighting that was interesting.
Yeah, but I think the overworld itself, even though it took so long to travel in the original 12, was still its strongest point. Just because of the variety of environments you can see, but also how real the world felt. Not only because of the environmental changes you see in the weather, but also with how you travel through them. Not only through going through zones, but also like how when you go rent an airship at the Ether Dome, you actually can go on the airship itself, which I found really neat when I was younger. And if it was like done today, it'd probably just be quick travel, where in many games that does that. But in Final Fantasy 12, you actually get to be in the airship and talk to people, which I think is really neat. And I do like how most of the gold that you you'll earn in this game is through enemy loot, and that does feel a bit more immersive because enemies usually don't carry gil or that much gil, and you're selling hides to people in order to get gold or gil. So yeah, I do think the overworld is Final Fantasy XII's strongest point, even in the original. But that one problem I told about Final Fantasy XII having in the original game is sort of fixed in this game, with the ×2 ×4 speed, with you being able to go where you need to much faster. You want to add anything else to the overworld?
Yeah, I was gonna say too. Not only just in the overworld itself being unique, I think that is also the strongest point of 12, as well as the amount of variety of monsters that are on the open world. I don't think I've ever played a Final Fantasy game that had this many array of different enemies and different monsters. You could be walking around fighting, your generic wolves, and then you all of a sudden could be fighting cactars, miniature ones, to really huge ones, to T-Rexars from Final Fantasy VIII, to jellyfish things that float in the air, to like these weird ball of lightning and different elemental ones that are really strong. I mean, it's vast amount of just creative monsters that I really liked about 12.
I do like how those monsters have like behaviors of their own. Some of them will attack you on sight, some of them will just leave you alone, and there's even the T-Rex that will eat other monsters in order to gain strength, which was pretty neat and awesome when I first saw it like years back.
Yeah, that I remember vividly. The first time I played 12 was fighting wolves, and the next thing I know, I see a T-Rex and it attacks me and kills me instantly. I'm like, it's the crazy amount of difficulty spike with the monsters is actually very intricate. And it reminded me of an MMO game, to be quite honest. Not that it is one, it's just the structure of the game really felt like one. Because at the time, you did have Final Fantasy XI around the same time that this game came out. They did have a similar looking style to them. So I guess that could be a trait of it, you know. Yeah, the overworld was great. I like the overworld.
Talking about MMOs, let's talk about the combat, because people said that the combat is basically like an MMO.
Yeah, it kind of is. It kind of is. One of the main things.
I'd probably say this.
Yeah.
The combat is just... It's just basically an ATB system that the series had, but it's laid out on overworld where there's no random encounters, and you can fight whatever you want on the overworld without there being any battle transitions.
That is true, but I also think too, where people get it confused at being an MMO, not just that, but the one thing that I kind of am still mixed on just slightly is the gambit system. When I originally played it on in the original Vanilla 12, I didn't quite grasp the gambit system very well, because I've never played MMOs at the time. I didn't even play Final Fantasy XI. Didn't have a PC that could run PC games at that point in time, and it was really different. I'm so used to being able to take control of the characters through a turn-based combat setting, like 10-2 and 10 was. So 12 was definitely miles day and night from 10-2 and 10. So that initial experience kind of threw me for a loop completely. So that might have been one of the initial things that made me dislike 12 in the beginning. And I never could recover trying to figure it out when I was playing the game. Didn't know you had to buy the gambits from vendors to give you the ability to unlock those to use them more efficiently.
But talking about the gambits, well, my thoughts on gambits is that the number one complaint about the gambits for people is that with the gambit system, the game just plays itself. And yeah, they're right. If you set up your gambits pretty well, you can get the game to play itself. But I do think setting up the gambits themselves can be fun, just because they're still pre-planning on which combination of gambits will work best, and to see your gambits work wonderfully against this group of enemies that you're facing due to your pre-planning feels pretty great. And even then, even if you can get the game to play itself, you still need a bit of time before you can really get the game to play itself by like the mid game or end game. Just because, like Forrest said, you do need to not only buy the individual gambits in order for the gambit system to work, but you also have to earn more gambit slots through the license board. Oh,
I'm glad you brought up the license board.
Yeah.
Because that was actually another interesting thing that I had a dislike for the original 12. Really, the core structure of 12 back then and now was all because of how 10 and 10-2 kind of hooked me in that environment. So after years of it passing by and me playing different other games and me trying to play other types of styles of JRPGs, I think my opinion on the license board has changed now. In the original 12, you were forced on a predetermined structured board everybody used, and you were randomly put in different spots, and you had to unlock the license board that way. So no character was really ideally different from each other, because they shared the same board in a sense. Where in Final Fantasy XII Zodiac Age, that's not the case. They give them actual different job systems where you can either be a black mage, you can be, a white mage, you could. And
they basically added a job system.
Essentially. Yeah. So that made it possible to unlock the license boards a lot easier, unlock abilities a lot easier, and they had their own tweak own tweak that added some, variety to the gameplay.
I think this change is for the better, just because, like you said, every character was the same in the original 12. Why in this game, you do actually have to plan ahead on which class you want these characters in and how the combination of classes would work together well in this game, which I think really adds some much needed engagement, just because you in the previous Final Fantasy 12 you just filled up license board points, but now in this game you have to think on class composition and abilities and how they work with each other now in terms of choosing which character have which class and which character you want to put in for the team for a current battle.
Yeah, that's true. But also, when you're unlocking these weapons, so meaning if you unlock a license board to get a stronger sword or axe or magic, you have to actually purchase it from the vendor. But not only do you have to purchase these certain elemental abilities, there are some you just outright cannot purchase. That will cause you to be a sort of sense a treasure hunter. You will have to explore environments to find certain abilities on the field, in dungeons. And not only that, but you need to also sacrifice some time out of your way of playing the story to do some of the missions.
For people who played the original, you probably noticed that your higher tier spells isn't where they used to be now.
Yes.
That's because in the Zodiac Age or international version of the game, the higher tier spells like Haste, Hastaga, Idol, they're in chests now, not from a vendor anymore.
Yes, they actually, by tweaking the license board, making it user friendly, they in essence made it much harder for you to get these abilities. You just can't get them just by purchasing them. That would essentially make the game easier, and I kind of understand that. One of the abilities I had to get was the guild drop, and I actually had to find it. It wasn't like I could go buy it from the vendor shop. And
I had to find Shade of Darkness myself.
Yeah. So you will need to do some exploration. You will need to take some time out to do some of the missions to unlock some more abilities, meaning gaining extra abilities through missions or through through hunting them down in the environments. So I do like the fact they give you this the extra exploration to do this. Not only that, but when you go to your missions and you go to the missions board, you are able to see a huge array of missions that you can do in the game. My only complaint with the missions, however, is that when you complete a mission, you have to go back to the original person who gave you the mission to actually complete it. It's not like you can go to the board in any town hub and just complete the mission there. You have to.
You know what make these hunts better in Final Fantasy 15?
What's that?
You can actually accept multiples.
That is true. In Final Fantasy 15, you could not do that. I don't know why. I think that's really stupid. But in Zodiac Age, you can. And even though this game is a remake, it's an older game that has a better composition structured for missions than 15.
I think the hunts are much more interesting in 12 than 15, just because there are storylines to these hunts.
Yes, that is true. There's one that comes to mind that you stumble across when you're playing the story. There's a little kid who gets lost. His father's looking for him. You need to do this quest. Now, you could say no and just be a complete idiot and be rude to this guy. Be like, I'm not going to help you. But in a way, it's best for you to do so because it allows you to have easier access later on to a path you need to take. Trust me, it's worth it.
And these hunt quests do lead to some really interesting side quests. One of them lead to Gilgamesh, basically.
That
in this game.
is a very interesting, very riveting fight, by the way.
Yeah.
And it has a little humor to it, believe it or not. So that's things like that really what makes Final Fantasy 12 Zodiac Age shine a lot.
In terms of side quests, I say the hunts are like the major part of the side quests in this game. But there are also other side quests in the game you can partake in as well.
Yes, there are. Not to mention, I guess before we forget, there is actually a trial mode. Think of it like playing Horde mode in like Gears of War, where you and your buddies are essentially fighting hordes of enemies each level. And in the case of this game, the trial mode allows you to fight not only minor enemies, major enemies, but boss enemies, as well as side quest enemies, mission based enemies, that allow you to gain extra experience and extra licensing points that you can actually carry over to the actual game, believe it or not. You can also gain items and gil through the quest as well that carries over. Essentially, all you need to do is have a save file with your current levels and ranks, and they will allow you to use those. And I do highly recommend at least giving it a shot towards the end of the game to get extra licensing points and, you know, extra experience.
The trial mode is basically, well, I'm gonna use the Tales reference. Trails of Graces from Tales of Graces F. It's basically just a gauntlet of enemies you can go through in Final Fantasy XII Zodiac Age. I'm not sure if it has some of the more interesting restrictions that Trails of Graces did, since I didn't really go through trial mode all that much.
I did.
But
I actually did. And
okay.
The game allows you to use your items that you carried over from your main story. Here's the problem. The higher you go up in the levels, they give you just waves of just higher level tiered enemies. What they do is they structure the levels by 10 sets. So for levels 1 through 10 of the time trial, you have your low tier to your high tier enemies, and then your boss enemy. Maybe be a boss from like the main story, maybe one from a side quest you might have never done, by the way, or ones you might have actually done. So what's interesting is that if you've never encountered any of the enemies in the main story, whether it be the side quests or the missions, you will fight them in this trial mode. So if you've never played them and you go into trial mode thinking you're high tier level, that doesn't mean anything if you don't understand how these enemies work. But you are more than allowed to use your items. That doesn't mean you can just buy items after each mission. You need to be very conservative with your items, because when you use those items, they carry back over to the main game, which means if you use up 10 high potions, you lost 10 potions going back into the main story.
Let's actually talk about the combat, since we only gave a brief description of combat, which was an ATB system, but that's it. Basically, like I said, the combat is just basically your usual ATB system you usually find in Final Fantasy. You can attack, use your techniques, use your magic. And when you do it, there's a queue where you have to attack them. And despite it being in real time, there's no real reaction to the combat. It's just basically clicking on menus and seeing stuff happens.
You know what I find interesting about that, though, is that if you try to play this game the old-fashioned way, going through the menus and selecting your abilities, because you can actually set the ATB to either wait or active. I tried setting it to wait to see if I could control my main character, or just switching a different character and just playing them by myself. You can't do that, and here's why. So very briefly, I'm gonna go back to the gambit system for just a moment. So let's say, for instance, you don't set any of your characters to an active gambit. You don't set their preset gambits. When you have what is called a guest character, they're preset with a gambit system automatically. They will do their own thing. But if you have your main characters and their gambits are not set properly or not set, they will not, in essence, do anything. They will just stand there on the field, and that's a problem. So you're forced to have to use the gambit system so they're at least partially active. But your controlled character, you can actually disable the gambit and control them through the menu. So you can actually control them doing attack. You just have to press square and press down and up to go through the character list. Yeah, you could actually control all of them, but to be honest, the menu is there's so many different menus within a menu that you're not going to want to do that. And as fast paced as this game is, you definitely need to have the gambits active.
With how the game is set, you can try to control everyone in your character, but it's really time consuming, especially with how you do need to use attack a bunch of times until an enemy dies.
Yeah. Plus, you got so many multiple enemies on the field doing different, casting different abilities, meaning they could be poisoning a character. One could be having a death counter on them. One could be stoned. You need to have a structure set up for it. So in this case, I do think the Gambit system it's warranted.
The combat system is designed around Gambit system essentially.
Yeah, it reminded me of Final Fantasy VIII with the whole draw system. As much as I disliked that draw system in 8, it was warranted in the way the game was structured.
There's also one other mechanic in Final Fantasy XII, which was changed, and that's how missed quickenings. Quickenings. That's what their special attacks are called. When you do those quickenings, they wasted all your MP in the original game, which made them kind of detrimental to you because the quickenings damage didn't really scale all that well later in endgame. And using quickening on a boss basically meant you're dead in the water with no MP to heal, to cast anything. In Zodiac Age, they changed that with a meter, which makes quickening so much more useful. Just because since it's not detrimental anymore, because they don't use MP now. As for the mechanics of quickening itself, it's I think it's still flawed in how what determines your quickening chain is still kind of based partially on luck. Just because once you do your 3 quickenings, you have to press R2 enough times until you see another quickening that's available. But as far as I'm concerned, how many times you have to press it until another quickening happens is all RNG.
I was actually going to bring up a point that you brought up about that I noticed it's based on, I guess, the strongest quickening you have. But you have to keep pushing that button for it to randomize for you to select it.
Basically, you press quickening, and then there's usually 2 more that's available for the other 2 members that didn't use their quickenings. Once you do that, you have to press R2 to randomize it so it can do more quickenings.
Yeah, so it's weird. It's weird. Not only that, but when you select your what they call them in this game? I think it's your main Eidolon. Is that what they call them? I'm using Eidolon because I'm thinking of Final Fantasy 13, but my mistake. But they're Espers. Like your Espers in this game. Yes, they are. You can only pick one, just like in the original 12. You can't have one every character.
You can actually have multiple on every character, but you can only summon one each time. You can't summon like 2 or 3 summons.
Yes, that's true.
I do like how having a certain Esper for a certain class will allow them to have access to a spell or ability that they couldn't normally. Like in the Knight class, you need like a particular Esper in order to learn some really powerful cure magic. And I do think that does add to the customization part of the license board and pre-planning.
Yes, it does.
Anyway, back to quickenings. Yeah, I do think quickenings in the end is still flawed just because there's really no reliable way to get like a consistent chain going together. It's all RNG. But it's really pretty to look at still.
I think with the HD visuals, it makes it even look more impressive.
Yeah. And at least with the meter, it's basically there for extra damage. It doesn't impede you now in any way, which makes them somewhat useful. Them not impeding you makes an improvement over Final Fantasy XII, basically. In the original Final Fantasy XII, that is.
Yeah, I think everything overall for combat, the overworld, the license board, the Gambit system, I think all of it, by the way, one important thing makes this key that allows this whole game to be so much more enjoyable to play. It's the ×2 ×4 speed in combat. Because in this game, by allowing you to have ×2 ×4 speed, you're able to quickly go through the game and grind and get past a lot of these things quicker. That was
I'm
the
gonna ask you this then.
Mhm.
Do you find the combat engaging to you?
engaging in a sense that I like watching it in slow motion, or I mean normal speed, or engaging as in fulfilling to see them grind.
Just engaging of you feeling that you like this combat system for the sake of combat.
That's
Like how, yeah.
that's a good point. Let me see. Now, being as neutral as I can, because I'm gonna leave something I'm gonna say at the very end. I do not think, in a way, that this game's combat was the most riveting thing I ever played. I do think, however, I think it's quite addictive because the way the game flows, it just makes it a lot of fun to actually play. If I was playing on the original 12, I would have a whole different opinion. I would probably tell you right now, no, I don't care for the combat. I think it's boring. I think it's slow. It takes forever to grind, and it's a chore. But because the way they did it in 12, I like it a lot more. It makes it easy for me to, let's say I'm coming home late from work and I want to sit down and play a game for a little while. If I need to grind in 12, it's easy. Just put it time source speed and get your gambit set up and you're ready to go. So it makes that a lot more user friendly, in a sense.
I'd probably say for me, the combat isn't really the most engaging turn-based game I played. That's mostly because despite all the options you have, all the customization, it's still a vanilla ATB system. It's just really vanilla, and that's what makes it so to me. And what Final Fantasy XII Zodiac Age does isn't make the combat more engaging. It just makes it so you can go through it faster. And that speed doesn't enhance like the action of the game, like how Devil May Cry 4 Turbo mode did. It just makes it so you don't have to spend as much time in combat that you do in the original. So the best way I can say is that the additions of Final Fantasy XII in terms of combat is the ×2 ×4 speed. It mitigates the feeling of a boring combat system just by making it go faster, not because it added some new depth to the combat system.
I will tell you this though, by it being that way, the music, because it was remastered and it really I got kind of in a groove where you're grinding. It's like, okay, I got my gambit set the right way. I wouldn't say I was bored. I actually found myself liking the fact of it, which is weird because all I'm doing is sitting here watching them grind and just moving them around the field. But I don't know, I kind of liked it, which is, for me, it's interesting to say.
I'd probably say that the fact that the combat is automated now, well, the combat is based around being automated just because it's based around using the gambit system. It makes it that you can appreciate the environments more, I think.
Yes, the environments are very nice to look at.
Yeah.
And from time to time, you'll even see characters on the field, just random NPCs that will actually help you fight.
Yeah. In terms of combat, if you're looking for like a deep, engaging combat system, like the Shun Megumi Tensei series, you're not gonna find it here.
Nope, you're not gonna have hangouts with friends after school or.
No, just in terms of the combat system.
I'm kidding. I
Yeah.
know.
But yeah, combat, the biggest pro to it compared to the original, you can skip past it basically now.
Yeah, it's like having a VCR or DVD player. Fast forward. I think my opinions for the combat and gameplay, I think we covered all notes on it so far. I think the overall game in the essence is fun because of the improvements to the international version. So overall, my position on Zodiac Age is a lot more favorable than the original.
I would probably say this: Final Fantasy XII Zodiac Age is still not like an amazing game in my eyes, but it's a good game that mitigates a lot of the problems of the original. Now, it doesn't actually fixes the problem that the original had It just makes it much more bearable to go through. But Final Fantasy XII is still a pretty decent game, still, even with those problems. And the fact that you can mitigate the problems to the degree that the Zodiac Age does do wonders.
Yeah, and I think because they allow these improvements to be implemented and added to the international version, it really gives people a different opinion on the game. And I think a lot of people who might have didn't like myself, now consider it to be my second favorite Final Fantasy game of all time. So that's saying a lot for me.
Final Fantasy XII does still fixes some problems, like with the license board being much more individualized, and you having to think on how to build your character, which can be really engaging in terms of thinking which person should have this class, and how should I form my party around those classes. But besides those fixes, Final Fantasy XII is still almost mostly the same game. It just mitigates the annoyances that the original had. In conclusion, Final Fantasy XII, Zodiac Age, we like it. For me, I think in terms of visuals, it actually looked pretty good. Even though it still isn't that big of a jump in comparison to Final Fantasy X original remake, it's still a pretty good looking game. The music is awesome. The story I really like in terms of the political manipulation you see throughout the story, as well as the themes of vengeance and themes of being chained to the past, and how we need to be able to move on from the past and vengeance and to grow. And the overall gameplay is still good. The combat is still not all that engaging, and all the remake does in terms of the combat is basically makes it go along faster, so you don't have to deal with it too much. But I do think the content in the game overworld and the customization options that you get from the license board really does make it engaging. And I do like the gambit system in terms of you having to plan out how these sets of gambits will work against a group of foes, and to actually see it working wonderfully is really satisfying. How about you, Forrest?
Final Fantasy XII, I absolutely love the game, and like I said, it's because I never actually finished the original. I was able to appreciate the game more so than before, and I think the reason I was able to appreciate the game a lot more, and I think it really came out to me playing Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 13 trilogy. At first, the original game, I didn't like it because it was such a huge jump from Final Fantasy 10 and 10-2. Playing Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 13's trilogy, it made me appreciate this game more. And I think that's a bad thing in my eyes when you consider Square Enix merger after Squaresoft went bankrupt. And I don't know really what happened. Whenever they merged, I felt that their direction of their games, the franchise, it's kind of spiraled in this weird direction. Not really sure where to go next, and it makes me a little bit concerned with the remake of Final Fantasy VII in a sense. But I'm hoping that it's done in a reasonable, or at least close to the original 7. But being off topic, my apologies. I think also too, 12 really made me understand the gambit system more because it was more user friendly. It made me appreciate the complexities of the story, and like Peter mentioned, the revenge is the focal point of the story. The political aspect of the story is also secondary to it, but it's also just as important. But I think the historical accuracy of how it was told was done very well. The narrator did a really good job of portraying the next segment of the game. And so all those things really, when you piece it all together, makes it a very fun game to play. Would I say the replay value is high? Would I say would you want to go back and play it again? That's debatable. For me, I'm not keen on replaying games after I beat them the first time. I usually like to move on to something else. If I feel like I really want to play it again, at some point I might. It's very, very, very rare for me to ever want to replay a game again. But there are a few cases. Final Fantasy 12, maybe the game I replay again. And being that it's the second favorite Final Fantasy game, that's a good sign. The only other game I played where I've beat multiple times is Final Fantasy 9. I beat that game 4 times over the course of its release. So those things make it warranted for me to really like this game and why I like it so much.
In terms of replay value, I can see there being some replay value in this version of the game rather than 12 in the original 12. The replay value mostly comes with the license board system that's in this game. Basically, most of the replay value that you can get in this game now can be just trying out new classes and see how they pan out. That is a strong reason to replay the game, just to try out new classes. So that's a good thing, I think.
No, I agree. It is. Because you're not going to unlock every ability, every weapon, and gain every weapon by the time you beat the game. It's not.
And even then, there's in this license boards, you can gain a combination of 2 jobs for each character. So you can just try a different combination of jobs for a character and see how they mesh with each other.
Yeah.
This time. Yeah.
So that really makes it flexible for you to play the game any way you want to.
Yeah.
And surprisingly enough, some jobs make the game easier than others.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really wanted to, you can make this game as hard as you want to make it. It's all based on how you play the game.
So, Final Fantasy 12, pretty good. Or really good in terms of Forest's opinion.
Of course. Number 2.
In terms of me, I like it more than the original, but it's a good game, but I wouldn't really say it's an amazing game still.
If we were going back to the day when it was released, my opinion would be opposite. I don't think Final Fantasy 12 is that great. This version, however, changes my whole perspective. Not only on the game, but also on the fact of the improvements that they added. And I think the music, the remastered music, really adds to the immersion of the gameplay experience.
The time for speed also helps a lot.
Yes, I agree with that. It does. But overall, I like the game. I'm very pleased with Final Fantasy 12 Zodiac Age. I give it as many thumbs up as possible. I do think it's a game that you have to play. It's a classic Final Fantasy game that should be played at least once.
I say if you want to play Final Fantasy 12, go for it. It's still an enjoyable experience. It's not like a total game changer to me, but it's still a pretty decent RPG at the end of the day.
Yeah, I agree. And if Final Fantasy 15 and Final Fantasy 13 trilogy didn't really appeal to you, this game just might.